Hi, I'm Caroline Hill, editor of Legal IT Insider, and I'm here. I'm grateful to be joined by Dana Denis Smith, founder of Obelix Support. Hi, Dana.
Hello.
Nice to see you. So
Likewise.
Dana founded Obelisk in 2010. You can pick me up where I get this wrong. And Obelisk Support connects largely female ex-city solicitors to a need amongst corporates for talent, so it's described as a flexible working organisation. And I believe you're up to about 1,000 members. Is that right now? Is that correct?
I think we're near or just over 2,000 actually.
Over
So,
2,000 completely.
I
Okay,
know.
don't know where I
Yes.
got that. Okay, and the reasons, we'll come on to this in a bit. So I just want to ask you a little bit more about Obelisk for people who aren't familiar, but we're going to come on to talk about how you've entered recently the software business. But first, let's talk about, for people who don't know Obelisk. So you've been going quite a long time now. So tell everyone a little bit more about what Obelisk does and how it works.
Yeah, sure. I'd be very happy to.
Thank you.
So I started a business 10 years ago, primarily to address what I considered a kind of cost and affordability need among corporates that were seeing an increased volume of work, but couldn't, keep the cost on their balance sheets, so they couldn't hire a lawyer for everything they needed done. And I matched that to what I considered was a need among lawyers that didn't want to work full time and be tied to their chairs in their offices. And really, I mean, I championed people working from home. So for me, the start of the business was, it doesn't matter where somebody is, where they are, when they work. If you have a need that you can identify, you can scope it, somebody just delivers on time, that's sufficient. Obviously, now reflecting back to that wasn't a particularly compelling proposition, but luckily the world has seen the benefit of remote working in the last 5 months. So hopefully we don't need to explain anymore why working when somebody wants to work and how they want to work or where they want to work is actually good for business. So I was very motivated to start it also primarily for women because too many were dropping out completely from the workplace. There were no opportunities for them. There was no kind of middle ground between full-time all the time. And I know that because I was in one of the top global law firms and, you don't leave very often. That kind of, complete disconnection from the legal profession. So I thought there must be a middle ground and, we all know how to outsource anyway. Even, corporate outsourcing to a law firm is outsourcing of some sort. And with the right scoping and the right project management, it shouldn't matter where somebody is based. And we create opportunities nearer, their headquarters and get the work done.
Yeah, it's funny because I remember back in the day, this kind of venture was looked at. You had quite a lot of work to do to break down some barriers. I remember we've talked over many years, and it's quite funny to see. I mean, I'll come on in a bit to talk about how the market is, and there's obviously challenges and advantages, I'm sure, but it's quite interesting to see how things have changed so much, and how COVID, I guess, is in many ways a positive thing in terms of people being able to work in the way that they want to work.
Mm.
So let's talk about, and I do want to come back to talk about the market. There's so much to talk about. But first of all, very recently, you announced that you've been awarded £50,000 from Innovate UK to start building your own, I think I called it task management software, but we can dive deeper into what that means. But that's been a journey that you've been on for some time. And so I wondered if you could just talk a bit about what you've been doing behind the scenes in terms of, I think it was 2015 that we started talking about you building your own software. And then 2018, you launched a time recording app. So can you talk me through how that journey began in terms of what you started doing in 2015 and how that's evolved?
Yeah, so I think we started building our own technology when we passed the 500 lawyers mark, and it was very difficult to manage and match work to particular skill sets. And I looked in the market, and I think a lot of the innovation in the last 5 years, since I've been looking into the tech world, has been very much focused on the product of lawyers as opposed to the lawyers themselves. I think the biggest cost that we see is always linked to the time that people spend at work, maybe in the wrong place, being tied to their desk. So I've always been interested in how do you create opportunities around the people in the legal profession, not just the product they are producing. So for us, the beginning was literally how can we match work to the right people, and how can we scale up teams to deliver work faster. So that was the kind of, if you like, the first iteration of the product. I looked around in the market and I thought everything was trying to do everything, case management, the whole thing, maybe even on the bar side, where maybe our model is a little bit more similar because people are self-employed and they manage their own workloads. I found everything was overcomplicated for what we needed. I really like simplicity in technology, something that's easy to adopt and, kind of doesn't require, hours and hours of training and being stuck, being explained and lectured on how to use it. If it's not intuitive, I think it's, not great. And so I concluded that the only way was to build it in-house and accelerate our, matchmaking process. And so I always looked at the industry, industries everywhere other than the legal profession to see what can we learn, what can we bring in, and what have other people done that we could adopt and bring in to speed our operational model, if you like, to make it really efficient and be able to have 2,000 lawyers, but we know who they are, how they want to work. And so when we started, because even the business, I started with the kind of, the people that were leaving in mind. So my kind of product journey, if you like, was always around, so how can you work? Where do you want to work? How much capacity do you have? What do I rely on? What is the real-time capacity that we actually have that then I can then match into, projects that need delivered within a very set timeline. And so I always started with the individual journey, if you like, in our building of the tech. And so that's what we captured. We captured a lot of that kind of detail, where are you? Where do you want to work? How much time do you have? What kind of work you're looking for? Various things like that. Because we focus so much on availability and how people work and where, we've learned a lot about patterns of behavior around remote working. And that's what we were able to bring into the Innovate challenge, which was very much in response to the COVID, so the government was looking for innovation around challenges that have suddenly appeared in the economy because of this virus. And what we've learned is how to work remotely.
I'm just going to interrupt you because I want to focus on the Innovate UK, but I just want to understand. So, is this an evolution? The product that what you're doing now, has it been one long evolution? So you started off. So it's really interesting you say about it being too complicated. So you started off building. Did you get developers in 2015? Your own developers? Because I remember we talked about you were talking about doing open source technology and playing around with Ruby on Rails. I remember specifically we had that conversation. And then, so that was 2015. And then in 2018, you launched, as I said, the mobile time recording app, which showed pretty much what you've just said. So how much time people have spent on a project and matching the talent to the job, and also that sort of clear dashboards. It was also about the way that it was presented, wasn't it? So in terms of the simplicity that you're looking for, is that just one part? That was the same product being evolved over that period of time, and just developing it to do exactly what you wanted it to do.
Yeah, so I think that's, you're absolutely right. I mean, the time recording app came part of the kind of user portal. So we had a kind of, because we are a marketplace essentially, so we had a kind of lawyer space, we call it profile. And it's within that they have all sorts of, things they can do, including time recording.
Sorry. So you got your two things. I mean, you've got Buzz.
Buzz is Buzz is our internal. It's the kind of if you like the infrastructure.
Yes.
And Profile is the lawyers portal.
Okay, and that brings us. So as you started to talk about. Sorry for interrupting. So you Innovate UK just very recently gave you this award of 50,000, and as you're saying, it's just they're supporting businesses who are helping people overcome the challenges of COVID. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, across a number of sectors. A lot of them were linked to, say, the retail sector or the health or education. So Very, very few were for the legal sector. Obviously, there are very big challenges in the world, so in that sense, it was a proportionate allocation of funds. There were very limited amounts when I think they initially thought they were giving out 20 million. With a maximum award of 50 per company, and eventually they had to double that. But even then, you have less than 1,000 companies that were awarded money, and we are, I think, one of 5 or 6 in the legal sector, and most of them focus on the retail aspect of law around access to justice, or kind of robot law, if you like. So this is, in that sense, we've learned 2 things really, I think. One is how to work with professional knowledge workers, because that's kind of, the backbone of the economy is very much services led in the UK, and there's quite a big sector around the knowledge economy. And the other thing we knew is how to manage people remotely, and how to make them productive, and how to allocate the work in a way that makes it efficient, fills their capacity, and it kind of resolves problems across the board, from the client and all the way to the individual based at home. So it's a productivity tool that we're building, but it's definitely built around what we've learned. So it's kind of the Buzz 2.0 kind of iteration. That's the kind of main focus of the build.
Amazing, yeah. And so and in terms of, so what now? So obviously you've had developers for a while. So your core business, this is built up as a result of supporting your own business. And I know you've built up your development team over the years. But so what now? Like, what does it look like? Do you keep it within Obelix Support, or are you going to create a separate company? How's it going to work practically?
For the time being, because Obelix was awarded the grant, it will probably stay within as a division. We kind of got our own technology division anyway. Hopefully we can spin it out if we find the product is of interest to professional businesses beyond law. So what we're building now is not something that will be, only help professional organizations in the legal sector, but actually any company that finds itself having to blend the workforce, because right now a lot of us are based at home, and we're too afraid to go out, but there will be a time when we have to return part of the workforce, and some of them will be at home, some of them will be in. You want to make sure that you mix them enough that it doesn't become a handicap, really. I mean, basically, I guess what I'm trying to build here is the way women were being left behind through being required to be in a particular place. I don't want to become, for the new world of work where people choose to be remote, to become a handicap because they're not in the office, or the other way around. So how do you create a really transparent office environment that includes both people at home and in the office, and they work in a way that's fully transparent, and there's a lot of communication involved, but I don't think there is yet. I actually named it off-tech, actually, office technology. I think that, yes, we've got the kind of Microsoft and all of that, but there's not been a need to blend the offices in quite the same way. So how do you address this hybrid office space, and how can you make sure that there is no inequality developing between the ones in and the ones out? So we end up in a negative space again that leads to discrimination, all that kind of stuff, and people being disadvantaged for all the wrong reasons. So that's kind of what we're motivated by.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, I know you have concerns. I mean, I'd love to, if we've got time, maybe come back to a little bit more about what you're doing with the task management side, but I'm very conscious of time, and so I know that you have concerns about the impact of women in the workplace with COVID, and you've written, you led the open letter to General Counsel of quite a number of people expressing concern that female founders are potentially going to be sort of disadvantaged. And actually, I think one of a survey you did at the time, you said 39% of female founders have already seen a decrease in business. I think that was a couple of months ago. So tell me, first of all, so what do you still, has there been improvement? What's the market like at the moment for women, do you think?
Well, I think it's difficult to read anyway. The market is
Mm.
quite difficult for everybody. So I wasn't singling out women as being, suffering a bigger impact than maybe what was happening around. You can hear, the economies, the GDP drop of 22% is huge,
Yeah.
and that would be impacting a lot of businesses. So the real issue around women, both as founders, as CEOs or leaders, but also as employees, has been how to manage school and kids around work, or kids school with work. And again, for me, what I was really keen to communicate to the market is that remote working, the way we've seen it and we feel we've learned it, and a lot of people are just, and we might have both felt at times, quite overwhelmed by everything that we needed to do all at the same time, is that remote work normally doesn't happen with this kind of dose of childcare included. And to step back and reflect on the good lessons, and not to try to take away this idea that somehow working from home is bad because you have the kids around and it's you're being interrupted a lot. So what we found in the surveys, I did two surveys, one on women in law generally through my charity, and that was extraordinary in the sense that also showed a lot of women had to drop the number of hours they work, therefore they earn less, therefore they have less money to buy any childcare now that they can. So it kind of creates a really unfortunate loop of being trapped into the wrong working patterns. For the founders, especially April was a very intense month, safeguarding the business, but also understanding what support you can get from governments around the world. How do you access that? Different jurisdictions had very different requirements. So suddenly you could end up, if you operated internationally, having to put together forecasts for one country, a different kind of request, and it was very intense. And at the same time, most of them said they had the kids, also with them in the same room. So that was incredibly hard. But I'm seeing good signs that women have made it, So in that sense, they have seen it through. Now we've had a bit of a summer break. We'll see when we all come back in September what the reality is, and we might have to do another survey to get a sense. But we already had a disadvantage of no funding. From my previous research, which was actually earlier this year, very few women founders anyway, but they get less than 1% in VC money. So there's no runway. So unless you safeguard your business and you focus and you hopefully get clients that are sticky, it's very difficult to see through with childcare in your hands as well. So it's been quite an intense time, but they've displayed incredible resilience. So hats off.
Be interesting to see in September, won't it? As you said, when kids go back to school. I think that I think initially I saw a sort of lack of honesty, not for any, that sounds like a judgmental thing, but from amongst people who are afraid to admit that they weren't capable of delivering what they had to deliver because of children. And I think that perhaps that as time has gone on, I have seen some really good examples from employers actually of being supportive as it became clearer. And I think that women are always pretty good at juggling. So on conference calls, I think I've felt more tolerance personally amongst people that I work with of if you get interruptions and that thing. And I think that's a very interesting cultural shift in terms of working remotely. I don't know if you've observed this in terms of as we work on Zoom and bring people into our homes. I think that there's been a cultural shift towards people being more tolerant and being if children walk in, it's not such a big shame. So I think that's been perhaps helpful in terms of being honest. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see. But then I also saw it referenced as so Christina Blacklaws, who past president of the Law Society, referred to it on a panel as returning to the 1950s for women, in terms of having to try to do everything. So it'd be interesting to see. It'd be great if you did do another survey. I think it'd be really interesting to see how it progresses in September.
It will all come down to how they return and whether they can return to the hours they had before. Because again, there's so many question marks around school openings, and so there's a lot of unknowns, to be honest. But the initial findings were women took a much bigger hit, which is why we estimated that over 50 years of advancement has been lost in 5 months.
And on the from the founders' point of view, so you were very clear about law firms and general counsel need to back small business, and I think you said that new law, there's a risk of that new law businesses won't survive. Do you think that's? I mean, I see amongst law firms that I've talked about this on this very program before, but their budgets have obviously been cut. There's less room for innovation. But do you still stand by that? Do you think there's still a risk that new law businesses won't survive post COVID, or do you feel more optimistic now?
Well, I think there would be invariably an increase in competition. I mean, obviously, we're seeing now the first kind of wave of consolidation as a result of that increasing competition. It's very difficult, I think, as an environment, but also the spend of corporates doesn't really, favor new law, if you like. So you still have a quite large contingent of companies that are relatively small and nascent, really, some of them quite young, fighting for relatively small spend budgets, because most of them, most of the money still goes to the large law firms. So that creates competition, but among a cohort that's fighting for maybe 10%, 20% of the spend, as opposed to 80% of the spend. So that will have its own, people will fall over because there's no other way. You've got to win the business unless you've got the runway. And obviously there have been some really interesting fundraisers, even in, lockdown and all of that. But I'm not aware of any female founder raising any money in the last 5 months at any scale. So the kind of two elements. One is new law. I think there's also a danger that new law, when you look at leadership, looks very much like old law. A lot of the founders are male. And they're not being challenged, because I think law firms are seeing a lot of challenge from GCs around diversity, Black Lives Matter, we've seen that kind of, take center stage. So they're under a lot of pressure to show that partnership model is transforming, but the technology world in, new law is not looking terribly diverse. And when you look at who's raised in the last 5 months, and I do keep a spreadsheet, and I love reading your articles because I can update my spreadsheet, and I'm always, sighing with despair that yet again there is no woman in the founder team. And of course, being a founder is not the only way to succeed. Obviously, we've had very few women CEOs of very, very large of these new law entities. And we had the Axiom one, but she's been replaced. So there's very few women in leadership anyway. There's very few women founding companies, but I do think we do have a different way, and a different way of maybe caring about social impact that can really benefit the legal profession. And we want to have those voices there and to be backed. So it's a very mixed picture, but my concern is that the new law will look like old law, but totally not being challenged by the bias, because inequality has a habit of shifting from one place to another and hiding away from the limelight. So the more you spotlight one area, the more it hides in a different corner, and a little bit like a spider, right? So we need to always go and do a proper cleanup. But obviously, Litera has, Hayley, and that's great because she's one of the most successful women fundraisers.
Yeah.
So that's a really great story to have.
And actually, what's interesting, whilst we've been on this call, there's the news that we published that went out at 3:30 British BST, that Alma's business has been bought by Litera. So she founded a company called Allegory Law, which is a litigation platform, and it was bought by Integrian, and Litera has now bought it back from Integrian, which we just announced at 3:30, just as you and I went live. Although,
amazing.
So it's a reunite. Although I don't think Alma's necessarily going to be heading or involved, but it's a nice story in terms of reuniting them, because obviously she's another female founder.
She was probably one of the original cohort of well-known and success stories, right? So that's wow. I like this track record of Litera then.
So it's great. So it's a good story. And so what do you want to happen? So what can we, I want to come on just at the end to ask you one more thing about what you're doing with First 100 Years. So, but we've got a couple of minutes. What do you want? What can we challenge people to do in terms of now? Making sure that we don't have steps backwards.
I mean, I'm on the record to some degree talking about this a lot. I think we need commitment around supply diversity in the supply chain, and that comes with a commitment to spend. Especially now when there is increased competition, you've got to make sure that you are putting money in a diverse supply chain. And so I think, to me, it would be great if corporates, let's say, because they are to some degree, they're self-organized in a kind of GC for diversity and inclusion group, they could lead from the front and say, actually, we will commit 25% spend in our supply chain to go to diverse supplier. We can define that. There's legislation in the US that is pretty, established. I think it's about 50 years old. We can really create a framework for it. But at the end of the day, they need to be willing to engage with a diverse supplier base and buy from them, because that does away with a lot of the challenges women face around fundraising. I mean, my business wouldn't be a multi-million business if I hadn't had buyers. None of this would have happened. We wouldn't have this conversation. I had early champions in large corporates that understood the power of diversity in the supply chain. They committed. They knew the risk isn't high. You don't have to start giving a contract that's a multi-year, multi-million contract. You can start by giving a £20,000 break to somebody that will go way above and beyond to provide for that budget. And that would be an amazing stepping stone for them. So you've got to start somewhere. And having that commitment, I think it's low risk, but massive impact. And really, they win in the end because they are creating the right competition in the market.
Yeah, and a diverse chain, which you'll see has a certain hedging amount, but I think that they need to recognise that risk of that flight to the large traditional competitors in a market like this. That's the risk. So I think it's great to flag it so that people, I mean, I'm sure they're aware of it anyway, but aware of that tendency to fly. So you've won a lot of accolades for your project, the first 100 years, which is highlighting the first 100 years of women within the legal profession, which is an amazing project which really developed legs in an incredible way. So is that still something? I mean, you've got a lot on. Obviously, we've had COVID. You've now got another limb of your business. Is that still a focus? Is that just give me a quick update on that.
It's very much. It's got into the next 100 years, chapter. So there is very much focus on it. I mean, obviously, I'm not the only one. It's a charitable project. It has its own life, if you like. I'm glad I could create it and build it, but luckily, I don't have to be leading everything within it. It's much more global than it was. Obviously, it was set up to celebrate the centenary in the UK and Ireland, 100 years from the legislation that allowed women to become lawyers. But this year we had our first global project in the photography day, when we called it Face the Future, and we photographed across 24 locations, including the US and Australia and Singapore. And the plan is to create a book out of that output, because it was on the cusp of COVID, and really it was a time when we all looked forward to a very bright and very, very different reality. And now we are reflecting back on how it's changed in 5 months. It doesn't take long for progress to be wiped out. And so we have, if you like, in their own worlds, all these lawyers contributing through their photography project. And we're creating a global timeline around the movement of women. I find women lawyers are incredible because in the legal profession, because they've often become lawyers before they had the right to vote. I mean, in the US, we've just celebrated 100 years from the suffrage, but we had the first woman lawyer 151 years ago in the US. So, having these lawyer women really helped the campaign for change. And I think we obviously now have a VP candidate in the States, also a lawyer. Women lawyers can, really shake things up a little bit. And that's a positive thing to build on. But the plan for the next 100 years is to look at the global world of women in law and the things that are the same and the things that are different, and what we can learn, not just for the UK, but it's very much part of something that I spend a lot of time on. With pleasure.
Well, well done. I mean, it's an amazing initiative, and I think everyone joins me in saying, really, really well done. I think it's a fantastic effort, and we've run out of time, but I cannot wait until the next conversation to find out how everything's going. And I really appreciate you making time to chat to me.
It's been great to chat to you as well. Thank you for
Thanks.
having me.
Thank you. Cheers, Donna.